Picture this. A man climbs to the very top of one of the most secretive organizations on Earth. Acting boss. Untouchable. Feared. Then one angry girlfriend. One whispered rumor. And 3 weeks later, he's gone. No funeral. No grave. No body ever found. You think you know this story. You saw it on TV, wrapped in drama and a slow burn subplot. But the real version? Darker, faster, and far more brutal than fiction ever dared show. Today I'm pulling back the curtain on the true case that inspired it, using court testimony, not screenwriters. Stay with me, because the ending will surprise you. You probably remember the episode. A made man, living a double life, terrified that one slip would get him killed by the very brothers he trusted. The writers played it for tension, for tragedy, for a kind of sympathy you weren't supposed to feel for a guy like that. And when it aired, people talked about how bold it was, how it finally showed a side of this world nobody wanted to admit existed. But here's what I need you to understand. That story wasn't invented. It was borrowed and softened. Years before any television writer sat down with that script, there was a real man who lived it and died for it, in a way far colder than anything you saw on screen. He wasn't a soldier hiding in the shadows of the organization. He was running it. Acting boss, the guy other men answered to. And when the whispers started about his private life, it didn't end with a tense conversation or a tragic chase scene. It ended with a car ride to lunch that never happened, 4 gunshots in under a minute, and a body that vanished so completely his own family never got a grave to stand over. No drama, no final words, no closure for anyone who loved him. The show gave you a character to feel for. Reality gave a real man 30 seconds and a tarp. And that's the problem with turning truth into entertainment. Somewhere along the way, the edges get filed down until it's easier to watch. Tonight, we're putting those edges back. Now here's where most retellings get it wrong, and where I want you to really pay attention. Everyone loves to say he was killed because of who he was sleeping with. Clean story, simple villain, easy headline. But that's not what the court records show, and it's not how these things actually work. The rumor came first, yes. An angry girlfriend, a heated argument, a few words said out of spite that traveled faster than either of them could have imagined. Within days, it had reached the inner circle, the men who decide who lives, who leads, and who disappears. And on its own, maybe that whisper goes nowhere. Maybe it gets laughed off, buried, forgotten. Except it didn't arrive alone. It landed on top of months of resentment that was already simmering. Men who believed he was taking more than his share. Men who suspected he was building loyalty in the wrong direction, cozying up to outside power players instead of strengthening his own house. Men who quietly believed he was positioning himself to never give up the chair he was only supposed to be keeping warm. So when the rumor hit, it didn't create the conflict. It gave the conflict a label. Suddenly there was a tidy package. A leader who was stealing, a leader who was disloyal, and a leader who could be mocked in front of every other family. 3 separate failures, bundled into one verdict. That's the part the simplified version leaves out. This wasn't one scandal that brought down a powerful man. It was a man already on thin ice, handed the one piece of gossip that let everyone stop pretending they needed a reason. The whisper didn't start the fire. It just told everyone where to point the match. To understand why this man's death hit so hard, you have to understand how he got to that chair in the first place. And it wasn't glamour. It wasn't some Hollywood rise where a kid in a sharp suit shoots his way to the top in a single, dramatic year. It was decades. Quiet, grinding, unglamorous decades. His record tells the story better than any anecdote could. A gambling charge in his early 20s. A burglary conviction, almost a decade later. A forgery conviction, more than a decade after that. To an outsider, that looks like a string of failures. Inside that world, it reads completely differently. It reads as a man who kept showing up, who kept being useful, who absorbed setbacks and came back to work the next week, building relationships brick by brick. Bookmakers, collectors, union contacts, the kind of people who don't show up in headlines but who run the actual machinery underneath. He wasn't the guy getting photographed outside courthouses in expensive coats. He was the guy in the back room, making sure the numbers added up, making sure the right envelopes reached the right hands, making sure the daily business of squeezing cash out of people kept running smoothly and quietly. For most of his life, that was the entire job description. Be reliable, be invisible, be useful. And that's exactly what made his eventual rise so dangerous. When a man spends 30 years being the reliable one in the background, and then suddenly finds himself at the very top, with no one above him to answer to, old habits don't just disappear. The instincts that made him useful as a soldier started looking like ambition in a boss. Reliability built him up. Ambition is what tore him down. Here's something the movies almost never get across, and it's the key to understanding everything that happened next. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't a bunch of guys running around with guns, making it up as they went. What this man was part of, what he helped run, was a system, methodical, repeatable, almost boring in its efficiency, and that's exactly what made it so effective and so dangerous. Take construction. You had contractors desperate to cut costs, eager to avoid paying union rates. That's the opening. Then you had the connection. People inside who controlled which crews worked which sites, who could shut a job down with one phone call. From there, the choice was simple: pay for peace, or face slowdowns, pickets, sabotage, problems that magically appeared the moment you said no. One payment alone, according to later testimony, ran $70,000, just to let one company keep running without union labor. Now multiply that by gambling operations, by loan sharking, by every neighborhood where someone needed quick cash and had nowhere else to turn. Same pattern every time. Opportunity, connection, quiet pressure, cash moving in weekly, almost no paperwork, just trust and fear holding it all together. But here's the catch, and it's the part that eventually destroys everything. Every single payment, every favor, every arrangement creates a witness, a courier who knows too much, a contractor who could talk, a guy collecting envelopes who starts asking why his envelope is thinner than everyone else's. The system runs on silence, but it manufactures the very people who could break that silence. It was never a question of if it would unravel, only when, and who would be standing closest when it did. Now let's talk about the chair itself, because this is where everything starts to tip. For years, the man running things from the top had been operating from prison. Labor racketeering cases had caught up with him, and once he was locked away, someone had to keep the seat warm. There was a brief period where another man held things together day to day, but he too eventually went down on his own charges. So the chair sat empty, waiting, and from behind bars the imprisoned boss made his choice. He elevated our man to acting boss in 1990. On paper, that should have been the high point of his entire life. Decades of quiet, reliable work, finally rewarded with the top seat. A grinder finally getting his moment. But here's the problem with an acting title. It's temporary by definition. Everyone around him understood the unspoken rule: keep things stable, keep the money moving, and step aside when the real boss comes home. It's a caretaker role, nothing more. Except he didn't act like a caretaker. He acted like a man who intended to stay. He started showing up in places that sent a message: social clubs connected to other powerful families, high-profile weddings, building relationships outside his own house. To the people watching closely, this wasn't networking. This was a man auditioning for permanence in a role that was supposed to be borrowed. And in that world, a temporary leader who starts acting permanent doesn't read as ambitious or impressive. He reads as a threat to the man in prison waiting to come home, and to everyone underneath who suddenly isn't sure who they're really supposed to be loyal to. The chair was never his. He just forgot to act like it. Let me give you a picture of what overstepping actually looked like in practice. Because it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was just visibility. And visibility, in this world, is its own kind of confession. Every Tuesday, he was showing up at a social club tied to one of the most powerful and recognizable families in the entire organization. a place where the most famous boss of that era held court. Not once, not as a special occasion, every single week like a standing appointment. And then there was the wedding, a massive, high-profile celebration for the son of that same famous boss, held at one of the most exclusive venues around. Our man wasn't just invited, he was there, visible, present, part of the picture. Now, to an outsider, this might look like nothing. Networking, being social, building friendships. But inside that world, every appearance is a signal, and every signal gets read by people looking for exactly this kind of thing. What it said to everyone watching was simple. This man isn't just running his own house anymore. He's positioning himself inside someone else's house too. He's building relationships, building leverage, building a name for himself that extends beyond the borders of where he was supposed to stay in his lane. And in a world built on hierarchy, on territory, on everyone knowing exactly where they stand and who they answer to, a man who starts showing up everywhere, who starts being seen with everyone, isn't impressive. He's unpredictable, and unpredictable men make the people above them very, very nervous. He thought he was building stature. What he was actually building was a target. Here's a piece of this story that almost never makes it into the simplified version, and it tells you everything about the kind of world he was already operating in. Long before his own name came up for discussion, there was another man, someone who had spent years close to the top, who suddenly found himself facing serious prison time. And when men in that world face serious time, the people around them start asking one question, quietly, among themselves: will he talk? The fear wasn't theoretical, it was specific. If this man cooperated, it could expose everyone connected to him, including the very people who had elevated our acting boss into power. So a plan started forming, not an argument, not a confrontation, a quiet arrangement, using an old connection, someone trusted by both sides, to make a problem disappear before it became a courtroom. And our man wasn't on the sidelines for this. He was named, directly, as one of the people involved in trying to arrange it. Here's the part that should stop you for a second. The plan ultimately fell apart, not because anyone had second thoughts, not because of mercy, but because the people who needed to approve it, on the other side, said no. Internal politics. Turf. The machinery simply didn't align, and the man marked for elimination walked away, alive, for now. But think about what this tells you. This wasn't a man who stumbled into danger by accident later. He was already fluent in this language, the language of identifying problems, discussing solutions, weighing whether someone should simply cease to exist for the good of the organization. He had sat at that table before. He just didn't realize how soon he'd being whether subject of the conversation instead of a participant in it. Now we arrive at the meeting, and I want you to really sit with this one, because it's the moment that strips away every bit of drama you might be imagining and replaces it with something far colder. By November of that year, the pieces were all in place. The rumor had spread. The resentment over money had calcified. The suspicion about his ambitions had hardened into certainty. And the men who held real authority over his fate sat down together to make a decision. Here's what's chilling about it. This wasn't a heated argument. There's no record of shouting, of someone pounding a table, of anyone making a passionate case for mercy. By the accounts that later came out in court, the authorization for his murder was given calmly. And in that same conversation, the very same sitting, they moved straight into logistics, where the body would go, how it would be handled, who would be responsible for making sure it was never found. Think about the order of operations there. Before a single shot was fired, before he had any idea his fate had already been sealed, men were already discussing geography, already discussing disposal. The decision and the cleanup plan existed in the same breath, on the same afternoon, weeks before he'd even get in that car. That's not rage. That's not even really hatred. Not in the way we usually think about it. That's administration. That's men treating the end of a human life with the same procedural calm you'd used to plan a delivery schedule. And once that meeting ended, the outcome was no longer a possibility. It was simply a matter of when. Now here's something that should jump out at you. Because even within a world that runs on its own twisted rules, what happened next was a violation of those rules. In that world, there's supposed to be a process. You don't just remove a boss, even an acting one, without it going through the proper channels. Higher authority is supposed to be informed. Approval is supposed to be given. It's one of the few things that's meant to separate organized power from random chaos. It's the difference between a system and a free-for-all, and they broke it. Deliberately. Why? Because the real reason behind this murder was something they couldn't say out loud to anyone outside their own circle. Think about how that conversation would have gone, explaining to other powerful men who would judge, who would gossip, who would never let it go, that their leader was being removed because of rumors about who he's been intimate with. That admission alone would have brought a kind of ridicule onto the entire group that no amount of violence could fix afterward. So instead of going through the proper channels and risking that humiliation, they made the decision themselves, quietly, and accepted the risk of operating outside the rules. One of the men involved said it plainly, years later, in front of a federal jury. He said bluntly that nobody would respect them if word got out that they had a boss like that, sitting at the table discussing business. Read that again. The fear wasn't punishment from above. The fear was laughter. In that world, breaking the rules was acceptable. Being mocked for the reason behind it was not. So let's finish where it actually ended, not where the story feels like it should end. He'd been laying low, recently back from time away. On a January afternoon, two men picked him up near a place he trusted, told him they were going to lunch. He got in the back seat willingly. "Let's go eat." Those were his last words. Within moments, he was shot. He made a sound. He was shot again. No speech, no final confrontation, no dramatic standoff. Just seconds, and then silence. What happened afterward is almost more disturbing than the act itself. His body was searched, $8,000 in cash found in his pockets, along with the business card of a federal agent. Then he was wrapped, moved, driven upstate to a remote property, and simply disappeared. No funeral, no grave. To this day, his family has nowhere to stand and grieve him. That's not an oversight. That was the entire point. A man who vanishes completely sends a message that lingers far longer than a body ever could. And the organization moved on almost immediately. A new acting boss appointed within days. Other potential threats quietly discussed and weighed. The machine simply continuing as if nothing had happened. But silence, it turns out, isn't permanent. One by one, the men involved in that car, that meeting, that cleanup, they started talking to federal investigators. In open court, the same secrecy that was supposed to protect everyone forever became the very thing that exposed it all, decades later, in agonizing detail. So when you watch that storyline on screen, and you feel for that character, remember this. The real version didn't get a tragic ending. It just got erased. So here's where we land. The show gave you a character you could root for, fear for, maybe even cry for, because that's what good television does. It takes something true and shapes it into something bearable, a villain you understand, a tragedy with meaning, an ending, even a sad one, that gives you closure. But the real story never offered any of that. There was no slow build, no moment of reckoning, no final confrontation where the truth came out and justice, however twisted, was served. There was just a man, a car, a few seconds, and then nothing. No grave, no goodbye, no version of events anyone could ever fully verify, because the people who knew the truth spent years making sure no one ever would. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that this world was cruel, we already knew that. It's that the cruelty wasn't dramatic. It was efficient. It was quiet. It was, in its own horrifying way, ordinary to the people involved. The show got the shape of the story right. It just couldn't bring itself to show you how cold the real thing actually was. Now, you know. And that's a story worth remembering. Exactly as it happened.